one of the rules that we talk about is to don't let perfection be the enemy of good and defeat the blank page and let's get something done. So, for sure, we overthinkers unite and need to just defeat the blank page. Let's get something done, take a step, because that procrastination is turning into perseveration, which is just stalling folks out. It happens all the time. So, to just be able to say, I can iterate and get better and get something out there, absolutely. Like, you have to take that first step. It's not going to be easy, but you have to forgive yourself a little bit and let yourself make some mistakes along the way.
Hello, Marnie. Hello, Nick. Welcome to the show.
Woo!
Hey, Mark.
Welcome to Peak Performance Perspective, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. Now, as entrepreneurs, leadership geeks, and co-authors of the book Lead It Like Lasso, I'll start with you, Marnie. What does peak performance mean to you?
Oh, I think it is someone working at their highest potential. So they're happy because they're living according to their core values and delivering their value to the world.
That's an amazing goal, and that's what everybody wants. But what are the beginning steps to even get there?
Oh, you got to know yourself. So you have to start with understanding who you are so you can understand what value you bring to the world.
That's another great question. How do we get to know who we are? Because it's a question we've been asking since the dawn of time. We've been
Yeah,
sitting around
fair.
the fire trying to figure out who we are.
So you need to think about, so we always talk about saying how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you think about how you dad and how you work out and how you coach folks, right? There's some thread on how you do all of those things the same, right? And that's how you start thinking about your core value. Now, if you're stuck, you can always think about what makes you mad because the opposite of that is something that's important to you. So if you really start taking a look at how you do everything, the threads will start to, it's not easy, right? It's certainly not oh, quick, now that you gave me that, I should just be able to reel off my core values. But you do have to start thinking about really what are the drivers for you.
Nick, what does peak performance mean for you?
To me, Mark, it's being in the zone, in that flow. It seems so rare, and that's why I think it's your peak. But it's those times where you give yourself the balance, you're in a good place mentally, and you're just able to just run through things at the highest level, whether it's work related or non-work related, whether it's a sport like golf or whether it's knocking down a killer presentation to some prospect that you've been courting for years.
How do you get into that zone? And some of us can get into that zone, but we can't stay in that zone for a very long time. The
Yeah.
minutia of life. What are some
Yeah.
tips that you have utilized to be able to do that?
I think it's preparation in my opinion. I wish I knew how to just snap my fingers and get into the zone. But to me, you're in that zone when you're not thinking about it. And you're not thinking about it when you're prepared. That's how I try to approach everything. I can never be too over prepared for anything because as soon as you have that level of preparedness, it just instills confidence, in my opinion. And then once you have that confidence, that's the only chance. Again, I don't know the exact steps to get into that flow or that zone, but I know that the only times I've gotten there is when I'm really confident.
Now, Marnie, how does that strategy work out for classic overthinking?
Oh, yeah, fair.
Because there's some of us who are just never ready. So if I use that principle to get into the zone, I'm in getting in the zone for the next 50 years. How do we
So,
combat it?
so that's interesting because one of the rules that we talk about is to don't let perfection be the enemy of good and defeat the blank page and let's get something done. So, for sure, we overthinkers unite and need to just defeat the blank page. Let's get something done, take a step because that procrastination is turning into perseveration, which is just stalling folks out. It happens all the time. So, to just be able to say, I can iterate and get better and get something out there, absolutely. Like, you have to take that first step. It's not going to be easy, but you have to forgive yourself a little bit and let yourself make some mistakes along the way.
You also have to be willing to be vulnerable, right? Because sometimes taking that first step, the reason why we're so apprehensive to do it is because we're afraid of failure. And I don't like failing. I actually don't even like the word. I would rather use the word feedback to avoid that as much as possible. Going back to what I was saying earlier, I try to over prepare myself. But even in times when you're not over prepared, I think you still have to move forward exactly like Marnie was saying. And to me, that I am an overthinker, like you were saying earlier, Mark. But to me, it was my ability to, at some point, realize that, okay, it's okay to take a risk. And if I don't succeed, it's really feedback, not failure.
Nick, how do we maintain this balance? Because entrepreneurship to me is an art form. Because we're creating something out of nothing from the thin air. And like most artists, it's never finished. So how do you maintain this balance being in telling yourself like a guideline that, okay, this is good enough, and anything past this, I'm over chewing this morsel of food. How do you do that?
Well, it's hard, in my opinion. I think you have to develop guide rails. There's points where, okay, anything that happens within these guide rails. So from our perspective, we talk about this in our book, you set a vision and then you set up guide rails just to make sure that, yeah, you can deviate within a certain amount of threshold. But once you go past outside those thresholds, I think you've gone too far. So from my perspective, you give yourself the most flexibility you possibly can, to take risks, but you have certain thresholds where if you go beyond those guide rails, that you've probably gone a little bit too far. That seemed to work out for us. I don't know if that is the secret sauce, but that's something that we have found successful, and the folks that we speak with seem to agree that is a way to approach that.
Marnie, you and Nick scaled and sold a company for 8 figures in 3 years.
Yeah.
What's a leadership lesson that your journey forced you to learn fast?
Everything. And the key is how to learn fast, right? So Nick literally said to me one day, we should start a company to see if we can start a company. And so what we both really like is a challenge and learning and growing. And so the key was to figure out what we needed to learn and then run at it and iterate. So back to the like, you can't let perfect be the enemy of good or done. You have to put something out there and keep learning. Yeah, that was that. We also, before we started, the other thing that comes to mind is we knew our core values of how we were going to run the company before we even knew what we were going to run a company to do. So before we had the problem to solve, we knew certain core values and how we were going to tackle it.
So many of us are married to our businesses. Our identities have merged. Nick, after having such a successful company, such a high stake exit, how did you guys recalibrate your sense of identity and purpose post exit?
I think it goes back to what Marnie was saying earlier, which is we had identified what our core values were, and we built a business based off of those core values. And they were problem solving, right? They were education, they were helping other people. We knew that we were pretty good at doing those things because although the business we started, scaled, and sold was in an arena that we had never worked in before in terms of IT outsourcing. We sold a customer success solution to IT service providers. We really built the business off of those core values. And when we sold it, we knew that, okay, this is what drives us. This is what gets us going. This is what makes us tick. What is the next problem that we can take on that is in alignment with those core values? Because those are the things that really get us to get up out of bed every morning and put fingers to keyboard, have conversations. And in reality, it was pretty easy for us because although the widget changed drastically, the principles remained exactly the same.
It's if you've read Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. In the Infinite Game, there are goals along the way that's like leveling up in a video game. But if there's a higher good that you're aiming for, right, that's the challenge that we're seeking. So we built one level and we were able to put that level to the side in order to say, all right, now we're ready to go for the next level, as opposed to letting your baby go.
Yeah. Nick, the core values in the business world, right? It's akin to a diet for us, right? It's everything that we know we should be doing or should be eating, but it's so hard to stick to it. Because
Yeah.
again, the minutia of business comes into play, right?
Yeah.
So some of these things are so easy to talk about. We can write all these wonderful things about the things we ought to do and we got to follow, but almost all of us fall off. So for those who are listening, what are some things that you guys did to not only stay on track consistently, but also bring it to the next level of the game?
I think what you're describing, right, is culture. Core values is what drives you. Culture is exactly how it plays out. And I think the reality is, and it doesn't matter if you're an organization, corporation, or an individual, when you have that clash between what drives you and actually how it plays out, that's when things go really bad. That's when, on an individual basis, that's when you start getting stressed, developing anxiety. On an organizational basis, that's when you start losing employees and retention. And again, to your point, it's really hard to live up to those ideals. Business throws all sorts of things at you. I think that's where leadership comes in, right? Which is a willingness to assess and evaluate where you're at. And there's all different sorts of tools to do it. Ours was pretty informal. We would do periodic quarterly business reviews from a business standpoint, and we would actually evaluate, okay, one of our core values is raving fans. Are we taking actions to make sure that we are generating raving fans? Another one was education. Are we educating the market? So we would do some level of postmortem assessment looking backwards, and then from a forward-looking standpoint, a proactive standpoint, we would, again, I talked about guide rails earlier, every new big initiative that we took on, we tried to ensure that they were in alignment with to what our core values were. Is it perfect? No. But does it work? Absolutely. And you have to put in the work to do it.
Money in the world of entrepreneurship, having partners or co-founders is like a band getting together and playing together. And we know it
Yeah.
almost always ends with everybody hating each other. How have you guys managed to stay together as a unit, perform at the highest level, continue to perform? How do you guys deal with disagreements or direction or anything else that causes tension?
It's convenient for me because Nick is always right. And so I don't, it's just, I can just default to that. But so it takes the building of, so in Ted Lasso, he has his diamond dogs, right? Which is core group of folks that he lets challenge him and also support him. So Nick and I've worked with each other a long time, and we built that trust to be vulnerable, right? And so like biggest fan, harshest critic type of thing, you have to give someone permission to let them push you. And I think it took that building relationship to be able to trust that he's going to tell me if I'm going off the rails, right? Or he's going to encourage me if I'm doing the right thing. And in the company that we worked for before we owned a company, right? So we worked together in another company. It was acquired 3 times, and there was a lot of pressure building situations where we got to experience stress and how to support each other and how to help each other through that. And I think that all builds the trust to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to accept criticism, feedback from someone.
I think it also helps that we have very complementary skill sets. We have different personality types. Marnie is much more outgoing. She's much more extroverted, although she'll claim that she's not. Whereas I'm very different. I'm more quiet. I'm more introverted. I think Marnie comes as with the background of as an educator, whereas I came from a background in business and specifically technology. I think it would be a little bit more of a struggle. I think we get through it because we've been through so much, but I think where I see a lot of challenges is where the skill sets and the personality types very much overlap. And fortunately, in our case, that is not the case.
Marnie, what made Ted Lasso the perfect lens through which we must explore modern day leadership?
So it's really counterculture, right? When you see so many, well, face it, all of the, who is it, Nick, Tyler, Sheridan, is it?
Yeah.
Like all those shows that are really command and control leadership. Ted Lasso, completely opposite of that, right? So he brought this positivity in a time when the world was really down and needed to feel hope and to feel like the good guy could win. And one thing about the show is that it wasn't just a story that made you feel good when it was over. It made you want to be better. There's a Facebook group of 100,000 fans still that every day want to talk about how Ted Lasso makes them want to be better. And that's the difference. There are a lot of good stories out there, but everybody could see themselves or someone they knew as elements of the story. Nick and I talk all the time with folks who have been called the real Ted Lasso in their lives, and people could see themselves in the struggles and the positive things that happen and how folks move past it. Yet Ted wasn't perfect, right? And we got to witness him not being perfect, but then grow to be better. What we really saw is that our first rule is leadership is life and that everyone is a leader. And so people could recognize, like, no matter where you are, you can learn to lead yourself to a better place.
Is toxic positivity
Hmm.
a risk in the Lasso style of leadership? Can it go too far?
I
Well,
think it can. Go ahead, Marnie. I'm sorry.
no, you go.
I should let Marnie answer because the backstory behind the book was that I discovered Ted Lasso during COVID, and I'm watching it and I was like, something about this show seems familiar. And the reality of it was that Ted Lasso was Marnie Stockman. I was seeing Marnie Stockman on the TV screen. And I get your question, Mark. I think there are times when positivity can be toxic, but I think those times are when it's inauthentic. And I think that is one of the many lessons that come through with Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is a master class on emotional intelligence. And one of the biggest elements of emotional intelligence that comes across is authenticity. There are certainly plenty of others, but I think when you talk about the notion that positivity sometimes can be viewed as toxic, I think in almost every case, it is because of one or two reasons when that might happen. One is because the positivity is deemed inauthentic, or the second is the positivity is just unrealistic. And unfortunately, when you're in a world of unrealistic expectations, that it's really hard to succeed regardless. But you can definitely control the authenticity aspect of positivity.
Ron,
That
did
was a
you want to
great
say something on
answer.
this?
Yeah. So specifically what comes to mind is Ted was always positive, but he wasn't ignorant of the negativity around him. It is just how he chose to respond to it. And I specifically think of the dartboard scene, right? And for sure everyone can remember that scene. And Rupert says something very rude and salty, and Ted says, "Hey now, not when I'm holding a dart," right? Like he doesn't ignore it and act like it's okay. He doesn't accept it and agree with him, but he very clearly and positively says, "Not while I'm holding a dart," right? So he didn't ignore it. And I think there's this notion of don't take your kindness for weakness. And Ted Lasso did a good job of always being kind and positive, but not weak. And he, to Nick's point, was authentic and was willing to call out the bad thing without being bad or hateful in any way.
So many of us watch this show, and it's such an admirable character, and we respect it, and we love him, and we want to be like him, but there's a nagging thought in our head, it's just not realistic. So, how do we deal with this? How do we build ourselves up so that we know how to deal with the emotion when people don't get our leadership style?
I think one of the things that is not necessarily fair about the show is that when most people hear Ted Lasso, they think, okay, the only leader in that show was Ted, the Ted character himself. When in reality, and we write about this in our book, almost all of the characters in that show demonstrated exceptional leadership qualities. And I think the key point that we try to make in our book is there are tons of different ways to lead. It does not have to be like Ted. We called the Ted Lasso character the positivity guru archetype. You also had Rebecca Welton, who is more of a visionary transformer,
Yeah.
or Roy Kent, who was the tough love mentor, or Keely, who was the supportive collaborator. We go on and on. We've got one for Sam as well. Not everybody is meant to lead the same way. Marnie leads a completely different way, i.e., a lot like Ted Lasso, than I lead. But that's okay. We're both very effective in our specific archetype. And I think one of the things that we really try to share with the readers of our book and the listeners of our podcast is the key is not a specific way to lead, but the key is to understand what your strengths are
Yeah.
and what your areas for growth are. And you start to tackle those areas for improvement, those areas of growth one by one, either through education on yourself or by surrounding yourself with people who can help you grow as an individual.
Marnie, we have an innate desire to be liked as human beings.
Yeah.
How does being liked ever get in the way of leading effectively? It's getting in the way. How do we deal with it?
For sure it can. I mean, that is how you get the yes people at work that just refuse to push you. And some of that is what Nick mentioned about the showing that you can be vulnerable and that you make mistakes. So very often the person at the top is seen on a pedestal and perfect, and people will just yes ma'am or yes sir them because they want to be liked by that person, and so they don't ever push. It was interesting, we talk about Melinda Gates does a mean tweet activity with her company where she actually had to blindly read some negative things about herself, and when she read it, she's like, yeah, I can do that, but I need to work on this. And when she acknowledged that, suddenly frees up the place. So first there's this pedestal piece that people are just always trying to like go along with the chief, and so they don't put themselves in a place where they're controversial at all. And then the other piece is to not ever stand up for what you believe, and that starts to really feel authentic, and that's the struggle behind that. The more you know yourself, the more you understand what drives you, and the more you understand others, the more you're able to, in a kind way, communicate an honest answer. Brene Brown in Dare to Lead and many other great books talks about how clear is kind. And so the kind thing to do is to be honest and clear. And when people can work toward that, you're right. It's not easy. It takes work. But anything else, multiple iterations. Let's just keep trying. And you're not going to get it right, but let's try again.
Nick, we all want to do things right the first time. And we have the best of intentions and we go about it, but sometimes it doesn't work out. So, what is one indicator that a leader has lost the locker room? And what can they do to come back into the game?
I think employee retention is one, and I think there's probably many indicators. But I think one of the things that we see often in our own experience, in my own experience, I won't speak for Marnie here, but I've been in leadership positions before where, for whatever reason, the morale was low. And it was during, I remember distinctly in the late 2000s, it was hard economic times, but we were losing people. And I think part of what you're responsible for is to ensure, like Marnie said, that you are honest and you are giving direction in a clear and constructive way. And I know that I wasn't at that time. There were outside factors in play, but I was not helping myself out. I distinctly remember, as you said, Mark, losing the locker room. And the sign was people leaving, people talking about leaving, people looking for other opportunities in different departments within the organization. So those are the obvious signs. I think a less obvious sign, although at the end of the day it ends up becoming obvious, is when people stop communicating with you. I think that is if you're just going along thinking as a leader, everything's great, had a meeting, didn't really get any tremendous feedback except for a nod here, a nod there. I think you're missing something. I think lack of communication is probably a telltale indicator that either you're holding useless meetings or somebody's not happy and you kind of lost, as you said, the locker room.
That's why it's quiet quitting. It's not the
Yes.
loud quitting. It's I'm not going to stop communicating.
Marnie, can empathy coexist with high performance?
Oh,
Because
100%.
the way it's almost looked at, it's almost at odds. We have to suck it up and just do it, right? Or at least that's what the gurus are telling us. How do we go about it?
I think we saw from Ted was a great example, one of those rising tide lifts all ships, right? So you can hold high standards and hold folks accountable and still be empathetic. So Ted is empathetic in that he understands where everybody is starting from, but he also brings books to show them who they could become. And he's willing to start with taking you where you are, from where you are to where you can become. And the reality of it is the stronger each individual becomes, really the stronger the whole locker room does become. But the trick is that's the long play. And where folks get stuck is the notion of high performing has to happen right now. And of course, command and control works in the short term. But what are you going to see? What Nick just said, turnover, right? People are not, if they are not becoming their best selves at work, if they can't get into the flow at work because they're just being micromanaged, being told what to do, you're going to lose them. And those short-term gains are not going to help for long-term high performance.
Ted was such an empathetic character, but he also maintained a very good balance in between being empathetic and being realistic. What are the dangers of leading with too much empathy? And how do we make sure that we're maintaining that balance?
Yeah, I think I'm going to surprise you a little bit here, Mark. I think you have to go pretty high on the empathetic scale to show too much empathy.
Much
Because
of
to me, empathy is really about, I think you can get three different definitions if you just type in the word empathy on Google, but it's really about appreciating someone else's perspective. And I can't, from my perspective, to me, that is the number one quality of an effective leader. So, sure, you can go way too high, but that's to the point where you're seeing things completely from their perspective with blind spots, in that you're not helping them see other solutions. And I think that is a trap that you potentially could fall into. But if done the right way, again, empathy is about, all right, I'm going to understand everyone's perspective, but I'm also going to help them get through once I understand that perspective. So to me, it's really hard. The only way you're ever going too far and you're striking yourself off balance is if you're not doing the second part, which is helping somebody work through the problem once you understand where they're coming from.
Marnie, we were talking about sometimes how we have a tendency to please people, and
guilty.
wanting to show empathy could be an unwanted side effect of people pleasing mentality. So if I'm listening to this and I want to be empathetic, but I'm always wondering, am I being too empathetic? Am I being too nice? How do I balance that out?
So I think it's accountability and what structures, systems, supports do you have in place to ensure that you are being held accountable and they are being held accountable. So to Nick's point, like empathy is understanding it from their perspective, but if you ignore everything else and just take the easy path, right, instead of maybe a more difficult path, but one that would get better outcome, that is when you're pushing empathy or people pleasing too far. But if you really do have good accountability measures and systems for checking that you're being held to that accountability structure, then you won't, that'll be your guide rail. We talk a lot about those guide rails, and we did meet regularly. So we met quarterly on site typically, and we would meet weekly to really track which direction we were going on things. And if things went off rail because X, Y, or Z problem came along, right? We could acknowledge the problem, but we didn't excuse the outcome. And then we would create a plan, a strategy in order to get back on the rails. So I think the accountability is the balance for how you can help that. I feel like Nick's going to disagree
Yeah, and
with
no, I
me.
completely agree. And I'll give you an example. The working with an employee who has a lot of, let's say, family dynamics, maybe has to bring a child to daycare or has a lot of doctor's appointments, taking care of a parent. That is not a situation that we are unfamiliar with. But so we are very empathetic to their position in that. To us, work-life balance was a very important thing. But we set up, to Marnie's point exactly, we set up accountability measures. Okay, you are more than willing to take the flexibility to take care of your parent or
Yeah.
take care of your child, or hit those doctor's appointments. But you know what? We have compulsory meetings. These are the meetings that we know you have to attend, otherwise you're going to be missing something. Or these are the goals for the week, for the month, what have you, that we have to get done. If those holding people accountable to those metrics, I think, is kinder than just saying, oh, I understand your position. It's not getting done. Maybe next time. I think so. Marrying the empathy with leniency, balance, but accountability is the key to not falling into that trap.
And open communication around that. Everyone understands an emergency. I think we had folks who very much were willing to say, this is an emergency. This is what I have coming up. I'm going to hand this off to this person or that person, right? Like they had the agency to figure out a solution or could say, I can't get this today. Can you pick this up? Of course. But it didn't negate the fact that the things needed to get done. So yeah, that flexibility and balance, I think, is key.
And I think, and I'm sorry, Mark, I'll add one last point. That's why Marnie and I often talk about this notion of there are no non-player characters. Everybody in every organization that we've run is a leader. You may not have it in title, but to Marnie's point, you have the agency to make decisions and you are empowered to do that. That to me is very much the key to success in any organizational setting. Again, it doesn't mean you have the power to make every decision, but here are your responsibilities. They're clearly articulated and communicated. You have some leeway and you have agency to lead whatever part you're leading, whatever you're responsible for. And beyond that, we provide flexibility to make sure you can have some sort of balance in your life.
Nick, part of the reason why Ted Lasso, the show, and then consequentially your book is so popular is because it's a very, quote, unconventional type of leadership. So do you think that our modern workplace culture rewards the wrong traits in leaders?
I think sometimes. I think sometimes it does. Marnie mentioned it earlier with Taylor Sheridan. We talk a lot about pop culture. When you think of viewing what leadership is in pop culture today, all you ever see is the football coach who's a drill sergeant, right? It's a military-based film that really glorifies the command and control type leadership. Now, I get it. In the military, it's important. Lives are on the line, so forth and so on. But at the same time, you don't see the counterculture, the example that we know works, which is servant leadership, which is what Ted Lasso is. There's been study after study that says this is the better approach for the long term. It's probably it's at worst a draw in the short term. But the reality of it in today's world is we're so short term focused with everything that we do, immediate gratification. We need it that the command and control, the authoritative type leadership is glorified, and the more servant type leadership, the growth leadership, is given a little bit of a bad name. But that's, in our view, that is completely short-sighted. If you're building a business, you talked about being an entrepreneur, you're not doing it for next month or next quarter. You're building it for growth and really the only way to do that is through empowerment through servant leadership principles.
But Marnie, why is it that way? I totally agree with the toxic, just hardcore military style, leadership style, and how people resonate with it, right? But it doesn't make sense because it's so controlling and it's so stifling. Whereas servant leadership, it's so much nicer. Why are more people gravitated towards this more jagged edged, sharp, painful way of leadership than this nice, comforting, supporting, empathetic style of servant leadership?
A good bit of that is because many of the leaders didn't plan on being there. The studies show that between 60 and 72% of leaders are accidental leaders with zero training. So if you are one of those accidental leaders, what do you know? Right? You've been a really good independent contributor, right? I am good at my work and I know how to do my work. Then suddenly you're in charge of the other people that are doing that type of work and you are the best at it. So what's easy? Mark, do it this way. Why you say, why do it that way? Because I was the best. I got promoted and that's how I did it. That's easy to see how that happens, right? But what you're not keeping in mind is that, Mark, I bet you and I have very different ways of going about things, right? And if instead we talk together about the outcomes and what we were trying to do, and sure, I'm going to share my strategies, and you realize, yeah, I would never bake them biscuits the way that Marnie would, but I would absolutely have this type of conversation with them, right? You would be able to use what's authentically you to get to the same result. But those accidental leaders just suddenly wake up one day. They're no longer doing any work, which frustrates them because they were good at the work that they did. And they're in charge of the people that are doing the same work, not as well as they were. So, what would you do? Quick pass. Tell them what to do, right? It's just like parenting. So, say you have a 3-year-old at home, Mark. Just say that was the case. Right now, when said 3-year-old wants to run from the car, right? You have to hold my hand. Why? You know the security, safety is your job, and you don't have time to bargain with your 3-year-old. You got to grab the hand, right? But as a 3-year-old gets older, what are you saying to them all the time? We always look both ways to make sure things are safe and secure, right? And I'm taller than you are, so you're going to hold my hand so they can see you coming, right? So then when you start giving the reasoning, then they will then learn to hold your hand. They will then learn to look both ways. But it's the same thing. That is the long-term play. And if you get that right along the way, there's less teenage angst, although there'll still be some of that too.
Nick, so if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm totally an accidental leader, or I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I better not hope be an accidental leader somehow. I want to grow in life. What are some steps I can take today to make sure I'm prepared down the line?
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I think I was an accidental leader. And I think everything that Marnie described about I was really good at something functionally. I just kept getting promoted and promoted. So I come at it from the standpoint of, okay, what would I tell the 22-year-old version of Nick? And that is that you have to seek it out. You have to develop yourself first. I think if you're ever going to be in a position to lead other people, and I think at some point most everybody on this entire planet will be in one way or another, then you have to remember that you cannot lead others without leading yourself first. I think that to me is lesson number one of everything. So when we talk about leadership as life, that's exactly what we mean. Lead yourself first. Understand who you are. Understand what your strengths are. Understand where your areas for growth are. And then try to seek out some sort of framework. And I think that's what we try to do with Lead It Like Lasso is there are 18 gazillion frameworks for leadership out there. Some of them are very aspirational. You can read Richard Branson or Oprah Winfrey, but you know what? We can't really relate to those type of people because they are super famous. Others are research based and they're very thorough and in depth, but hard to follow. I would have sought out something similar to what we have, which is a relatively relatable framework that is not overwhelming, that talks about, yeah, core values are important and how they play out with culture, setting a vision up, thinking about your legacy, understanding that having a support network to move forward and grow is important. I wish that I had, honestly, something like the blueprint that we tried to put together with Lead It Like Lasso. Is it perfect? No. Is this a shameless plug? Probably. But some sort of reference to say, okay, this is how I start leading myself first. And you know what? Those skills are almost transferable one-to-one when you start talking about leading organizations.
Marnie, if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, oh my God, these two have everything figured out. They make no mistakes ever.
Oh,
I
they
would
would be
never.
They would be
you
very
listener.
wrong.
That'd be so crazy.
When's the last time you doubted yourself as a leader? And how did you get yourself out of that cloudiness?
Yeah, like minutes ago. It happens on the daily. So Nick mentioned having your personal support network. We talk about having your personal board of advisors, right? Like on a daily basis, when I doubt something, I will go to Nick and we will talk through it. So you got to be vulnerable. You got to be willing to ask and question yourself and trust folks to get feedback. And you have to find places where you can learn and grow. So, yeah, folks that are listening, don't think for a second we have it all figured out. We're constantly asking, researching, reading, exploring, finding new ways, and questioning. Like, it's always good we love Adam Grant's book, Think Again. It's always good to rethink and re question yourself because things change, right? And you have to forgive yourself When you're young, it's everything was like high and mighty, and I'm certain I'm right about all these things. And you have to be able to say, I have grown and learned some things since then, and that's okay. So maybe I have a different, and it's interesting because you have to be really vulnerable with family and friends when, oh, you are like this. Actually, I'm not like that so much now.
Nick, which character in the show most challenged your leadership beliefs other than Ted Lasso?
Oh, that is a great question, Mark. Challenge my leadership beliefs? This is probably going to be a little bit of a cop out, but I think what we're continually surprised. We have a podcast where we review each episode and we try to pull out the leadership elements of that episode. And we are just constantly amazed at the character Keely Jones in what a powerful and good leader she is throughout the entire series. It's something that the first time through as I watched it, I liked the character itself. It made me smile, feel good. But she is, we call her the supportive collaborator, right? She is really strong in a lot of different elements of leadership, which caught me off guard even after watching the show one or two times. Now that I've watched it 46 times, it's, oh my God, there's Kelly again. She's right on top of it. I don't know, Marty, would you disagree with that? Is there
Oh,
any
I
other?
think I think Keely's a good answer. What I loved about the show is that everybody brought a different leadership style in their own authentic way. So I'm not a Roy Kent, although you can appreciate Roy Kent. And then when you really watch his arc and realize that he does come from a place of love, it made me feel a little bit better about a couple of my college volleyball coaches. Oh, that is who they were trying to be, as they called us those names on the court. They didn't get it exactly right. So I think that one for many might be the challenge, but I think everybody brought it their own authentic way, which is what made the show so brilliant, is they were all leaders and they were all different, but it all felt right for that character.
Marnie, what's something you left out of the and why?
Oh, if we could have done a character assessment with 1,000 people in it, we would have had Trent Krim, Coach Beard, and Leslie Higgins in the book. They are great characters. We wanted 5 distinct characters that had different personality traits without a lot of overlap and had a lot of depth within the show. But oh my goodness, there were really some elements of those 3 that we would like to have included. I'm curious. When Nick gets that squint, I always wonder, did I say something wrong or does he have a whole
No.
different idea?
No, I think as always, you're smarter than I am. That's exactly what I would have said, except
Oh, so you're
better.
just
So
mad that I.
I think that's perfect. Yeah.
This question is for the both of you. I can go Nick first and then Marnie next. If you could give one Ted Lasso quote to every CEO in America, what would it be? And you don't have to quote it verbatim, just maybe.
We can quote it verbatim. Don't you
Oh,
worry about that.
46 times he watched it, so I don't want to put him on the spot.
I won't say this one, but the most famous quote in the show is be curious, not judgmental. And I think I am going to say this one. So I think that particular quote says everything about what we were talking about earlier, which to me is the greatest superpower, which is empathy, seeing things from not only seeing things from someone else's perspective, but being curious about it. I think we get in trouble as leaders when we make snap judgments based on partial data about anything, about whether it's like your employees, your customers, your prospects, your supply chain, doesn't matter what it is. I think having a curious lens with almost everything that you take on, and again, not paralyzing, but if you don't know, be curious about it. I think that every CEO in America would be served to take that perspective.
Barney?
So I want to say what he said, but I won't because since he said that one, I can use the line that I suspect he was also thinking, and is when Roy Kent says, "Don't you dare settle for fine." So you really have to hold yourself. It's about that accountability piece, right? If the be curious has you developing empathy, the accountability needs to hold you to standards and keep those guide rails on. So Roy said that when Rebecca was dating someone who was fine. It's okay. Like a lot of people are fine, but you deserve better than fine. Don't you dare settle for fine. So if every CEO recognized to not let the little things slip along the way, to hold this standard and clear is kind, right? Have those honest conversations about the work that needs to be done, the work that's not getting done, I think is a good way to hold folks to a high standard.
I've been in the business world, the consulting world, and the agency world for so many years. Spent God knows how much money buying books, now building towers out of them. And I have never had such a refreshing conversation about leadership and reading a book that I've so much connected with. All this knowledge, all this theoretical knowledge, experience knowledge, practice knowledge, bought and sold companies and building things. And what's the next step? Where do we go from here?
Oh, we're excited about the next step. So we've dipped our toe in the water of the next step. So we're really aiming, we talk about in the back of the book, wanting to help people become the best versions of themselves. And we see a lot of people out in the world that are really stuck and need to learn to lead themselves. So we have started a newsletter called Work in Progress, which is a satirical newsletter with career and personal development advice. So think The Onion as your career coach, right? A little bit snarky. We said to our 20 somethings children, what would you share with someone else? And they were like, it's got to be funny or a critical list. So we aim to be funny with critical lists. So that's where we're starting with it. And I'll let Nick tell you where we're going with that.
Yeah, and then we're excited that in a couple months, I think the August timeframe, we have our next book coming out, which is very different than Lead It Like Lasso. It's called The Business of You. And instead of really relating it to a television show, it's set up more as a parable, a story, so to speak, that follows somebody happens to be a college student who's trying to stand out and differentiate themselves, looking for a job. But the story applies to people at in any environment where they're stuck. And Sydney, the lead character throughout the book, uses an app called Blue, which helps her with all the things that we love to talk about, which is identifying your core values, building a personal board of advisors, identifying your legacy, on and on, what we talk about in about everything that we talk about. And she uses this app, and we're actually building that app. So that's our next big thing. We're loving it. But for right now, workinprogress.ai it's a funny read, and we're
We
launching
enjoy writing it.
issue number 4 tomorrow, and we've gotten great feedback on a satirical view of your career development experiences.
So, Marnie, this app, for those who are listening, can you help them visualize how they would use it, how it would be helpful to them on a day-to-day basis?
There are two sides of it. One, if you think about doing the work for yourself. So there's a lot of like social media apps that put all of you out in the world, whether you're ready to put that out there or not. This is a more reflective piece to help you. Like we will help you figure out yourself within the app. So answer some questions, play some games, and we'll be able to deliver things to you like, does this feel like your core value? Is this the tagline of Mark Inc? That type of thing. So there's the whole helping you figure out you, which will include like write a better resume, write a better cover letter, write a better college application, right? How to talk about you and tell your story, how to give a better interview. And then on the other side, there's you in the world and leveling up, playing the infinite game. So building your personal board of advisors, getting feedback from mentors, learning tracks, that type of thing. Nick, do you want to add any? I'm running through what I know are requirements.
Yeah, we're in the early stages of prototype right now, but when the book comes out, we can describe the experience, what it looks like. So we're excited about it.
It's one thing to figure things out for yourself. It's another thing to offer it to others so that they can potentially learn from your experience and better their lives. And that says a lot about the characters that both of you have. So it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show, to be able to pick your mind a little bit. Where can people go to connect with you?
Easiest way to find us is at leaditlikelasso.com, or as Nick said, workinprogress.ai. And then we're easy to find on LinkedIn because there aren't many of us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show, guys. I hope to talk to you soon again.
Oh, thank you so much.
Mark. Very kind. Thanks.